Well, thank you for tuning in again this week. And I want to do my cheesy little cyber hug. So there's a cyber hug for you. Love you all. Miss you very much. And we want to remind you to take advantage of the technology. So share videos and links with other people. Pause, take screenshots, things you'd like to save for later. And then email info@Rivergate to give us feedback on the cyber experience or to just ask questions or get connected better with the church. We're going to continue this week on the subject of faith. We talked a couple weeks ago about how to build faith, and then last week we kind of transitioned a little bit and talked about the kind of faith that gets heaven's special attention. And then today we're going to be talking about when our faith hits a wall. So in a very real way, the current state of affairs is having an impact on our lives. There's a direct financial impact and even talk of increasing financial impact as time goes by. And so there's a lot of financial fears, a lot of trials and tribulations people are experiencing related to their pocketbooks. So we're going to talk about this impact of COVID-19 on our bank accounts and how do we respond by faith with that. But in order for us to do that, I want to do a little Economics 101 lesson. Excuse me, it's going to be short. Don't worry, it'll be fun. It'll be good. All right, so Economics 101 here. So economics is basically the study of how people and groups of people use their resources. Two general categories. There's microeconomics. That's the stuff that impacts small groups of people or individuals. And then there's macroeconomics, how decisions impact an entire region or entire nation or even the entire world. Individual markets and entire economy, right? So supply and demand is probably one of the single most basic and powerful principles in economics, as it is a part of just about every other factor in one way or another. And supply, basically, how much of something is there. And then demand, how many people want it and are willing to pay for it. The exchange of goods and services are what keeps the wheels of economy moving. So companies will exchange money for raw materials, and then we exchange our time and energy to the company for money, and then companies turn that raw materials, our time and energy, into products. People buy the products, and then the process begins over and over again. So anytime there's a disruption to that process, the economy is impacted. So if there's not enough materials or workers, that creates a supply problem. If there's not enough people with a need, not enough people with a want, or not enough cash to actually buy those things, that causes a demand problem. Certain groups can see temporary or even permanent increases. So what are some examples?
Toilet paper.
Yes, toilet paper. So toilet paper companies are doing great. What's another one?
Hand sanitizer.
Hand sanitizer, off the shelves. So those people are rolling in the dough. Their kids' college is paid for. The healthcare industry, and we say thank God for those folks, but they're seeing an increase. They're being called in off the benches even and coming back to serve and help. And one of the things that we notice too is Zoom users. So people, that's right, it increases. FaceTime and all those apps. I know people are now paying and upgrading their services to get those. And then other groups, we're seeing temporary, even permanent decreases, like
restaurants, gyms,
yes.
Traveling now, tickets anywhere, airplanes, bus.
Uber
everywhere.
drivers, taxi industry, tourism, all those places. And as authorities and individuals continue to make operating decisions, then more and more of our economy is affected. And that means more and more of us, you and I, are being affected by that. Because of the coronavirus, many folks are choosing to be prudent. They're tightening their belts until things level out, which means that there's less of a demand, which is impacting the economy, even for those folks who might not be necessarily suffering individually. Others are finding themselves out of work, out of money, and feel like they're out of options. For all of us, in one way or another, the impact on the economy affects our bank accounts, and it starts to get pretty real. For the child of God who is trusting the Lord for provision, it can start to feel like the faith hits a wall. And that's where our topic is today, faith hitting the wall. So we're going to do a little story time here. Alex and I are going to be sharing a couple different testimonies and then unfolding those throughout the message. And we're going to start off with Alex sharing about Farmville.
Yeah, so this is where my faith particularly hit the financial wall. And so it was the spring and summer of '98. I was out of work. I had been applying for probably college grad positions, particularly in our community, even some exact positions that I had held at other places that I was just getting passed over, honestly. At that time, too, we were considering, should we go back to school? Should we find some other way to for our lives? Yeah. So we had chosen to take a trip to Pennsylvania to look at a college for Chris to finish his credentials at. And we were there, and we just didn't feel like that's what the Lord wanted us to do at the time. And actually, over that weekend, I started to feel sick and nauseous. And not that really had an effect on our decision, but we ended up coming home. I was still applying for positions, and this nausea was not going away. It just wasn't disappearing. We really didn't have the finances to go to a doctor, so I had a friend that said, hey, listen, I think you should probably take a pregnancy test. And I thought that was the silliest thing because I was on birth control. It was impossible for me to be pregnant at this point.
Not quite immaculate, but pretty close.
It seemed like to me. So I did. We picked up a pregnancy test, and lo and behold, that's when we found out we were pregnant with our first baby. At that moment, hyper fear began to take control of my life. I was just overwhelmed. We had very little money in the bank. We had no insurance. Neither one of us was really in a career position. I was afraid. And so I began to even apply for any and all jobs that were available in the newspaper. This was back in the day when we actually had newspapers.
Actually used the newspaper to look for a job.
I had looked through the paper that particular week, and I had applied for every single position. And I just didn't know what to do. I felt like a failure. I felt there was just this wave of condemnation that just started taking over on me. And it actually came through verses that I had known since I was a kid. Verses like that were just plaguing my brain. Ones like, if a man won't work, he won't eat. Lazy people are soon poor. So the scriptures were actually, at that point, overwhelming me with condemnation.
And that's just like the enemy. He starts off with a nugget of truth, twists it, and gets it to work against us.
Right.
And now we think it's God doing this to us. It's the truth. It's the Bible. It's these absolute principles are actually what's condemning us, and that's really not accurate. So, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
So I guess my give up moment was a story, or this took place after I applied for yet another position at Walmart. I had applied for numerous positions at Walmart. And normally I sent my application in, and then a week later I would call to follow up on my application. And finally, after 6 or 7 positions, this lady, I think she just had mercy on me for a young 24-year-old girl that wasn't getting jobs at Walmart. And she said, honey, you are overqualified for any job that we have here available. And I said, it doesn't matter. I just want to work so that I can have income. And she said, we won't do that, because what will happen is we'll give you the position. It'll last a few weeks or a month, and then you'll be qualified to go somewhere else and get a better job, and you will. And so this isn't going to work for us or you. And I hung up the phone, and my first thought was, I was angry with God. I couldn't get a job anywhere. So I went through my anger phase, and then I cried my eyes out. And I was at that moment, I just had nothing else, nowhere else to turn.
Yeah, we'll be unfolding these stories, like we said, as we go. But for me, Tennessee was a time for me. And if you've been around the church long enough, you've heard us talk about Tennessee before. Some of our most challenging times, but some of the times we look back and we say we grew so much during these times. There are so many cool things that happened. And so just to kind of give you a little preface there, we had been living in Maryland, doing well. We were actually debt-free with the exception of the mortgage on our home. We had some money, savings in the bank, and like things were looking good. And God called us and said, "I'm moving you." And the short of it is, it was a prophetic thing. He set up a bunch of different benchmarks and kept calling us to step out in faith each step of the way, and we did. So fast forward now, we're in Tennessee, and we're like, okay, God, this is some great adventure. This is our Abrahamic move, go to a place I will show you. We didn't know anybody there. We didn't have any connections. We weren't going there for a ministry position. We found a job. I found a job to plug myself into, to support, supply for the family while we were there. And then the bottom falls out.
Literally.
Yeah, it does. The bottom falls out. I was misled a bit about the job. There was just things that were different than what they had told me. And so the income was greatly impacted by that. Our savings began to be depleted over the course of about 6 to 9 months. We went from savings in the bank to completely drained. Because we still owned a home in Maryland, we weren't able to get certain types of assistance. We were considered wealthy landowners and landlords. And so we were literally eating out of food banks at local churches and hand to mouth. And then there was a trip to Liberia that had been scheduled, and the money was supposed to be in place for that trip. Some people that were sponsoring us had said, yes, we're going to sponsor you. And then unfortunately, when it came right down to the wire, they said, oh, we decided to put our money elsewhere. And so now we actually found ourselves, like, I was ready to, cancel the trip, but both of us prayerfully, we just were like, no, God said you're supposed to do this. We actually put that money on that trip on a credit card, which we had sworn off, and we would counsel anybody, don't do it, that. And this and that. But we just didn't know what else to do. We didn't, and we just, the struggle was real. It was very real, very tough. There was even one moment where there was a guy that was in the church we were attending, and he was a contractor and did very large, businesses. It was around Nashville, so a lot of wealth in the area, and he would do huge contracts. So he had large crews, big trucks, lots of equipment, and so I had said to him, we were friends and had developed a friendship, and I said, hey, I feel led to sow something into the kingdom. I don't have any cash, but I want to just sow my work into your business. So anything, I'll go clean up a job site, and I'm going to do it for free. I don't want any pay. I just want to sow it into the kingdom. Like I was, I wasn't telling him this exactly, but I was so desperate. I thought, Lord, what else can I do? Let me just put my faith in you and let me do this. And he refused me.
Couldn't give the work away.
he wouldn't. Yeah, he wouldn't do it. And now, to his credit, I love the guy. To his credit, he just in good conscience didn't feel like he could do that. It felt so dishonoring to him to do that, but he couldn't offer me any kind of position or anything. And I remember saying, no, really, it's okay. And he just kept saying, no, I just can't. When I got off the phone, I was in tears as a grown man with a family that I was trying to support, 4 kids at home and my wife, and I'm looking and going, I got no work and I got no promise of work, and I don't know how to provide for my family. Yeah. The financial struggle for me was compounded by this anger, similarly, and guilt around scriptures again. The man who cannot take care of his family is worse than an infidel. Yeah. The man who does not work will not eat. Like these are these same thing. The enemy just kind of going, oh yeah, here you are. Our faith in these two circumstances, 2 different seasons of life, our faith had hit a wall. Yep. It literally had hit that wall, and it was suffering. And we needed some secure truths that could trump our very scary facts. The facts we were facing were scary, and we needed secure truths to trump those facts. Yep. And so when your faith hits that wall, and kind of our analogy today is when your faith hits the wall, it's like you're facing the Great Wall of China. And you're looking up and you're kind of going, this is insurmountable. Yeah. I cannot scale this thing. I can't climb over it. There's no way around it. As far as I look either side, I've got hundreds of miles of wall. I couldn't walk around this thing, and it's guarded by ninjas. So the Great Wall of China, right? Insurmountable, can't get around it, guarded by ninjas. I get that ninjas are Japanese, and I apologize to all our Asian friends out there, but that's kind of where it was with us. And so, and when your faith hits the Great Wall of China, your hope bounces right back at you and just slaps you in the face.
Okay.
And you've got some choices to make. You can either learn to live on the wrong side of breakthrough and just kind of slump down at the wall and be like, you know what, I'm just going to set up camp right here and hope that crumbs fall off the edge and maybe I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Or you can convert that wall of resistance into your own personal wailing wall. So we're using the analogy of walls today. The Wailing Wall is also called the Western Wall. It's the only remaining structure from the Second Temple in Jerusalem. And the Jews, the temple that was destroyed back in 70 AD by the Romans, but it is a uniquely holy and sacred place to the Jews to this day, and they will gather at the Wailing Wall and bring their requests to God, and they pray, and they're looking for that breakthrough. Devout Jewish followers, they'll make special pilgrimages to that wall throughout time, to dig in and get a fresh faith and get a fresh fire from God to believe. And they're really what they're saying is, God, I want to encounter you here.
Yeah.
I want you to meet me here at this Wailing Wall. So we're suggesting that don't let that become the place where you say, I'm just going to learn to live on this side of the wall. But when it looks like the Great Wall of China has collided with your faith, turn that wall into a Wailing Wall. Meet with God, have an encounter with God, and dig in. The wall of resistance becomes our place of encounter. We don't turn away from that struggle, but we actually turn toward it and keep pressing in. And rather than letting that remain the wall of interference, we turn it into the wall of intercession.
Yeah.
All right, so a wall of interference becomes a wall of intercession. And how do we do that? Well, a couple things. Over the last couple weeks, we've made some suggestions. That still stands. We do what we said a couple weeks ago, which was know your God, be at peace in the process, and then rehearse the truth. Knowing our God, it keeps us on the edge in the forefront of developing our understanding of His character, of His nature, and of how He cares for us, what He's willing to do, and who He wants to be for us through the hardship. Then being at peace in the process reminds us that we're in a journey. Life is not just a moment of destination. We're not just trying to plow through this moment so we can get to this thing that's on the other side. But Jesus is making us like Him. The process of life is making us more like Jesus in this thing. So we have to be at peace with the fact that this is a process, and that no matter what, I have a foundation that I fall back on, and that is my relationship with God, and I'm going to win no matter what. We want the wins to look really cool in the process.
Yes, that'd be good.
We want them to be more comfortable, to be more lavish, but that's the kind of wins we want. And we want the space between those wins to shrink down to some minuscule, perforation. But that's not always the case. And so we need to rehearse the truth. That's the last one. When we discover more things about God, and as we're going through that process, we're learning nuggets of truth that are eternal, and it's our privilege and our responsibility to rehearse those over and over and over again until they become our soul habit. That's our knee-jerk way of thinking and feeling. Last week we talked about reading stories about people who have got great faith. Yeah. We've got Bible stories, we've got modern stories, we've got everything in between of real situations where God came through in miraculous ways. And if we rehearse those, we see not only does it build our faith that God can do those kinds of things and that He often does and will do those kinds of things, but it builds our faith for our own selves that wow, these are folks and this is the kind of faith they had. They're people just like me, that I can have the kind of faith and I can engage God and intercede in a way that sees breakthrough come in my life. And I want to say about that too, we're not just pretending. When we see somebody else's faith and we imitate it, Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ, or follow me as I follow Christ. That's not pretending, that's not being fake. It's in that moment we're adopting and exercising what we see in someone else that was successful and authentic and real in their relationship with God, and we're adopting that for ourselves and exercising it so that it until it becomes more naturally alive and fully alive in and through us. So now we're saying, once we know these are the ways we build up our faith, we're saying when that faith hits a wall, we're gonna ram against that, turn it into a wailing wall of intercession, and now we're gonna be plugging away and going after looking for our victory. So let's go back to some story time now on this, and we're gonna go back to Alex in Farmville.
Okay. So the three questions was that what do we learn? What did I learn from God or about God? in this moment in Farmville. And so I think probably the primary thing that I learned about him was that he was my provider. He was my Jehovah Jireh. And that provision can absolutely come from the work of my hands. But whether it's there or not, I will have everything I need.
Yeah.
And if it's not there, then at this moment, I don't need it. And that was really hard to, it obviously didn't line up with my feelings, but I had to believe that was true. And that was the truth about God that began to transform in this moment in our lives.
Yeah.
For me.
And when you were talking about the work of your hands, as long as the work we're doing is an extension of our faith in and our trust in and our relationship with God and not a substitute for.
True.
And that's where the real challenge comes in, is when we believe God has said, all right, I'm done. You're supposed to take care of yourself now. And it's not happening. That's where the really challenge comes in. How about finding peace in the process? That was the second question. How did you find peace in the process?
Yeah, I think in order to have that cadence of peace, because it doesn't just happen in a moment, you have to create a cadence of that. And during this time, I just chose to believe the promises that God had set forth in his word, and to believe my husband. I mean, I just focused on what his word said, and our relationship. His faith during that time was a support to me, and I just choose to align my thoughts with the word of the Lord and the word of my husband, which was working against those feelings that I was feeling. That was my feelings had to start to change and line up with what the word and what we knew to be true. I think that was probably the biggest thing for me at that point.
Yeah, that's so good that these revelations become the anchor points and the posts that you then tell your feelings, you need to start wrapping around this. And I picture a tether ball, like it starts out, your feelings are so far away from that post. But if you just stay faithful, then just keep batting those feelings, eventually as they wrap around, they get closer and closer to when they collide to the truth of what that post is. Yeah. Really cool. So the last question.
The last question was, what new truths did I rehearse in the face of this painful, challenging moment? And I would say that I was to do my part and then trust the Lord with what is or isn't in front of me. I wrote scriptures on our mirror in the bathroom with Expo marker. I spoke out loud. We're created in the image of God, and he spoke to create the world. And I think sometimes we don't actually use our mouths to declare out those truths. So when my thoughts would go into a pattern of condemnation or depression or the idea that I was going to bring this little baby into our situation, it was scary. So I had to stop those off, and I would begin to just speak out the verses I was going and memorizing to transform and to transition my brain from going into a place that was not good. It was not faithful. It was not the word. It was not moving in the direction of changing the situation. And in practical ways, we gave up unnecessary expenses until something shifted.
Yeah.
And we did. So things that I thought I needed or preferred or wanted, I learned the difference between those things and what we really needed at that time, in that moment.
Yeah, that's excellent too. I mean, we're spirit, soul, and body beings. So we don't, for the child of God, everything is sacred. Mm-hmm. Our body is sacred. Yep. Our bank account's sacred, and our personal time with Jesus is sacred. Our emotions are sacred. Like everything is to be sacred. And so to make the very practical steps. And sometimes people in the church, people who believe, can get a little foolish in that way. They think like, I'm going to charge forward and keep doing things the same way because I've got God. And maybe the Lord is saying, hold on. Yes, you do have me, and I will take care of you, but don't be presumptuous. Don't be foolish in the way you conduct yourself just because I'll take care of you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes God will call us to a prophetic act, right? A prophetic act is designed to give us breakthrough, right? We obey God, and then we get breakthrough. So if giving and donating something, like that kind of thing, if God really speaks that. But sometimes we're kind of like scrambling, looking and saying, I'll just give something away. I may have been doing that, back in my story in Tennessee, just kind of scrambling and saying, I'll give this away. Maybe that was the case. But it also wasn't our food money.
Right.
I was giving of my time, saying I can give my time for that. So really good there.
So for you, what did you learn about God during that time in Tennessee?
All right, so I put mine into some bullet thoughts here. My first one was that God isn't afraid of my tantrums. I really appreciated that. His idea of needs can be very different from mine, so similar to your journey there. Also, that his silence isn't disapproval. There was times where he just was quiet as I was ranting and raving, and he wasn't disapproving. He was just waiting. He just let me have my moment. Also, that he loves for us to discover truth and not just recognize it. Sometimes we want to hear it, we want it to be fed to us, and he wants us to discover it. He has an infinite number of ways for meeting our needs.
That's right.
That was one for me too that I learned about him. He is more creative than I gave him credit for.
And how did you find peace in this process that we were living in Tennessee?
Right. So my anguish was wrapped around the idea that I was doing everything I could to no avail. That was what my anguish was wrapped around. Yeah. I kept thinking that God was waiting for me to finally do the right thing. When I ran out of ideas and I couldn't even give my work away, I initially just kind of slunk in defeat. But that's when my eyes shifted off of me and onto him. Now I wasn't wailing or accusing or demanding, I was just being surrendered. Peace came in the knowledge that there truly was nothing else for me to do but trust. Yeah. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, wait a second. I really have done everything I can. I'm not in some grievous sin, and so God's punishing me in some way. Like he hasn't forgotten about me. Like I no longer had lingering concerns that I had failed God. And so he was throwing me to the wolves. The peace came as I relaxed into his responsibility for me, not my responsibility for me. I had done everything he taught me to do in order to align myself with him and his provision, and now it was his turn, and I just kind of had to simply wait.
Kind of surrender.
Yeah. Yep.
So the last question was, what new truths did you rehearse in the face of this challenging time that we were living? So
the big newer truths for me, the new stuff for me, was that God didn't promise to provide for me if I took all the right steps at all the right times. If that was so, then I wouldn't have needed his provision to begin with, right?
Right.
I'm not off the hook for acting in wisdom and in accordance with his word, but I'm not responsible to be perfect in order to be cared for by my Father. The next one was that trials, tribulations, and suffering, they don't have to be fun. We don't have to face them with joyful anticipation. They would stop qualifying as trials and tribulations and suffering if we did. But neither do I have to look at them and say that this is from God. I stopped believing in God's permissive versus his perfect will during this season. I no longer believe in those things. I believe God's will is always perfect. Yeah. And when something happens, it doesn't have to necessarily be his desire or his will, even though he's allowing things. But he is powerful enough to weave and to work out his perfect will in and through it and in and through us. Yeah. So that was a little shift for me, but that was a new one. So also that this was a season that forged a phrase in my soul that became a staple for me. I am being trained to rule and reign with God for eternity. How easy did I expect that training to be? Yeah. So according to Hebrews 5:7-9, Jesus didn't enjoy his trials, but he learned how to keep himself aligned with the Father by enduring them. So that process perfected Jesus and empowered his authority as Savior of all, and that same process is often what God's using to perfect me in what I'm called to be and who I'm called to be. So some other truths that weren't necessarily new, but they got owned to a whole new level. All right, so the truths that we accept have to be tempered within us. Right? Suffering is one of the ways that God petrifies those truths into the kind of stone we can build our life on. So one of these was that God is seldom early but never late. God is really not threatened by our tantrums. They don't necessarily motivate him to action, but they don't turn him away either. My past service to God isn't what earns me miracles when I need them. Yeah. I cannot earn what grace provides. My past service to God was a love gift. And the minute I think he owes me something because of it, it stops being a gift, and now I made it his pay. It's his paycheck or something.
Yeah.
And also the reality of sonship just went to a whole new level for me in that.
Both of us.
For both of us for sure.
Season. Yeah.
So our upgraded faith. As we mentioned last week, this process upgrades our faith. So that faith that we just talked about was now empowering our prayers at the Wailing Wall.
Yeah.
Ironically, the quality of that faith had increased and changed. So the driving force behind it was no longer fear or desperation. It was empowered by a resignation to the Father's care for both of us, for Alex and in Farmville and for me in Tennessee. And the shift was almost subtle, but it made all the difference. The shift for me, and I think for both of us, was, you have to, Lord, because I don't know what else to do.
Right.
Like, you have to because I'm desperate. You have to because I don't know what else to do. And he's not angry with that, but that wasn't the upgraded. That was an inferior place to be. The new place was, I trust you, Lord, because I only belong to you. Not because I'm looking for options and I'll take any option now, just something else to do. No, I am only yours. And I've done everything that I can think of that you would have me to do. So I'm just in your hands, and I'm okay with that. Also, I think our overall prayer time on the topic of provision actually decreased. Not out of disinterest, mind you. We were still very interested in being provided for. But I think it's literally because it's like we had better aim and a stronger arm. Right? So our faith had been upgraded. So rather than just constantly throwing this frantic prayer looking for provision, it was kind of like, Lord, you're my Father. You're going to take care of me. Boom.
That's right.
Like, it was that easy.
Yeah.
We spent less time wailing at the wall and more time wailing on the wall. Like, it was more effective what we were doing. So rather than agonizing over the problem, we just kept dragging each thought to the throne. It didn't take long, actually, for us to see a Wailing Wall shift into another kind of wall, and that's the walls of Jericho.
Yeah.
So our faith had hit the Great Wall of China. We turned it into the Wailing Wall at God's temple, and then we got to see the circumstances begin to crumble as his favor was released. So Lex, Farmville, share with us what the victory, what the Jericho Wall looked like for you.
Okay, well, when I was thinking about this, one of the things that when Chris and I were dating, he had made a statement, and he'd made it a couple times in our early years of being married even, that he did not want to have a must-work wife. And of course, I was in love, and I agreed to all of that, but I had absolutely no idea. I had no understanding of what that really meant, or what it looked like. I had worked outside the home since I was 14, and so I just said yes because we were together and I loved you, and it was...
Love you too.
Just the way it was. So after spending 4 months and about 100 plus applications and resumes...
That was crazy.
It was. I asked God, what am I supposed to do? Which I guess if I had had a little bit more wisdom, I would have asked this way earlier than the 4 months, but I didn't for whatever reason. But this situation spurred us to ask questions about where we were in our life at that moment, what we wanted to do, who we wanted to be, and it shifted for us at that moment. I connected with a few small businesses, owners in our church, and offered to do some bookkeeping for them. And we began a diligent plan of transitioning our lives to working towards becoming full-time ministers.
Yeah.
That was a real transition moment for us. And I stopped sending out resumes and applications and just worked about this probably 15 hours a week for, I think it was 3 businesses at the time, of just going in and doing their bookkeeping for a couple hours a week. It was a great sacrifice. Chris at the time was working 50 plus hours because I had a much smaller income at that point. And he would come home, he would shower, and he would eat dinner with me, and then he would start working on his courses for credentialing. I would go away every weekend, so we really didn't see each other very little during this season and time, but he did 9 courses of credential work in 3 months. It was just, he was working all the time between his job and working on the credentials. And it was just overwhelming.
Yeah.
It was a full season for sure. But here's the end result of that. So we applied in October for a full-time position. We had our first interview in Texas in November, and we moved in January. And our first full paid position of pastoring. And Jules was born 4 months later.
Yeah.
And so I believed that he used this situation to begin the changes that would need to take place in me specifically to become that stay-at-home wife and mom, and even prepared us for bigger things that we experienced even in our time in Tennessee. This moment transitioned us to do what has always been on our lives, the passion of our hearts, and that is to serve God's people. And so it made me think of the verse in Romans 8:28, and I'll read it out of the Passion Translation because I love how it's worded. But it says, "So we are convinced that every detail of our lives is continually woven together to fit into God's perfect plan of bringing good into our lives. For we are his lovers who have been called to fulfill his designed purpose." And to me, this was a pivotal moment and put us on the pathway of exactly what we're doing now.
I love it. I love it. And when you hear the resolutions, it's like you start to realize that the walls of Jericho are held together by the mortar of our own brokenness.
Yeah.
You know, it's like we're the ones holding those together. And a lot of what was taken down, when it came down, it wasn't so much that you finally got a job.
That's right.
It was that we realized what our promised land was. It was, hey, you're called to do this. Get in there, start preparing for that next phase of life.
Yeah, destiny.
Yeah, it was
Instead
really
of just surviving, it changed our place in destiny.
so
sure.
cool.
How about you?
So for me, I almost wish you would have gone last because I love the way yours ended up, but that's okay. So for me, the same dear brother who just couldn't in good conscience let me work for free, right? He actually called me back.
Yeah.
It was actually, I think it was, the next day or 2 days later, like, a day and a half or something, he said, "You'll never believe this." And I was like, "Try me," go ahead, tell me.
At this point, we'll believe anything.
He says, right after our conversation, and you're right, it was the next day. So right after our conversation yesterday, I got 2 calls for small jobs I can't afford to even put my crew on and the equipment.
That's right.
He says, then this morning, I got a call for 1 more, and then it hit me. Maybe Chris would be willing to take these on. And I think it's so cool that he got 2 calls right away, didn't think a thing about it. So I could have gotten possibly an answer the night before, right? But it was like God was letting me get to a place. Finally, he gives him another one. I wonder how many jobs would he have had stacked up if this guy wouldn't have realized it until later, right? So he said, would you be willing to take these on? I was like, yeah, of course I will. Got off the phone. He gave me all the contact information. I called all the people, set up an interview, times to go out there and do estimates and stuff. I immediately ran to the county commissioner's office and applied for the cheapest business license I could apply for that I had the qualifications for. It was $30. I had to take it out of our grocery money to get this license so I could legally do business in the area. I put in bids for all 3 jobs, got every single one of those. I finished all of the work within 2 weeks. Everybody paid right away the minute I had finished, and I made more in those 2 weeks than I had in the 2 months prior. All of our needs were met. And we were good. So praise God, that was the awesome story there. And there's nothing unique about this kind of faith. We've got the widow's flour and oil being talked about in 1 Kings 17, 7 through 16. The fishes and the loaves of Matthew 14, 13 to 21. Coins for the tax bill appearing in the mouth of a fish, Matthew 17, 27. Right? And then there's more stories all throughout history, right? And even some happening now. I heard one particular story. This guy, his name is Tunde Chetsi. He moved from Zimbabwe to the UK as a teenager, and then by the time he was 22, he's destitute. He's got literally 1 penny left. He is a believer. He goes to the church, puts the penny in an envelope, and puts that in the offering. He was so ashamed to have a penny go into the offering, he wanted to hide it in an envelope, right? So he puts it in the envelope, puts it in the offering. He says he prays for about 15, 20 minutes, has this vision, and God whispers to his heart. And he says, the vision itself is of a bank teller, and he sees a name tag. It says Sarah, and it's the name of the bank that he actually banks at. And God says, tomorrow, go to the bank, and a deposit will have been made in your account. Give half of it to Sarah. That's what the Lord says to him.
Wow.
He goes to the bank and finds 800 pounds in the bank. More money than he said he had seen in months. He hadn't seen that kind of money. He looked for Sarah right away, couldn't find her. He goes back the next day to make sure he's obedient. He finds this girl, Sarah, a very awkward moment. He literally goes up there and says, I'm supposed to give this to you. And she's like, what, am I supposed to deposit this? What do you want me to do with this? What, a bank account? He says, you don't understand. Tells her the whole story. She's kind of freaking out. He just walks away. But God makes provision happen.
That's right.
He does this, right?
He does.
And your provision story is worth telling. You probably have one, even if you're not aware of it. You probably already have one. And if not, then you're going to be at your wailing wall of intercession, and you're going to see the breakthrough in Jericho's walls come down, and your story will be worth telling as well, even the stories that are on their way. All right, so how do we boil this down, Lex? Give us the 3 words, how we boil it.
Believe. We have to change our belief. Behave and become.
Right. So believe, behave, become. This is how we kind of do everything in the kingdom. Every time there's a new truth we're trying to see released into our lives, a new upgrade, a new level we're trying to go to, become stronger and more like Jesus. It's about believing, behaving, becoming. We believe, we get to know our God, we trust His Word, faithful stories of others, we believe these things, we let them sink into our faith and start to take over our expectations. Then we behave, we act in accordance with that. We don't give up, we keep pounding with our upgraded faith against that resistance, and then we become. And that's two-sided. We become something different through the process ourselves, and then the things around us become, and they begin to change and take on the characteristics, the content, the inheritance of God gets released into them, and they transform and become things that God has designed and desired for us to walk in. All right, so how do we walk it out? We believe, behave, become by facing our wall of resistance, turning it into a wall of intercession, and then not stopping until that wall becomes Jericho's walls at our feet.
That's right.
And that is it for us. And now Hannah Holbrook is actually going to close us out in some prayer, and we really do hope to see everybody soon live and in person. Love you.